Hi there.
Good morning from
New York
New
City.
York City, from the Upper East Side. My name is Jonathan Ornstein. I'm the executive director of the Jewish Community Center of Krakow.
And I'm Rabbi Baumol. I'm a rabbi in Krakow.
And we are very excited to be part of the Global Day of Jewish Learning.
Day.
Mm-hmm. Global Day of Jewish Learning, I think, is the official name.
It's a Jewish Day, too.
It's every day is a Jewish day, Rabbi.
Okay.
They didn't teach you that in the seminary?
We're going to global it.
We are. And today we are going to talk to you a little bit about Jewish life in Poland, the remarkable rebirth of Jewish life in Poland, as well as an exciting initiative that we do in Krakow at the JCC called Ride for the Living. And then at the end, I think we're going to speak for about 45 minutes or so, and there'll be time for some Q&A. So if you have some questions, please get ready with them, and I think you can send those in through YouTube or through through the website.
Should we bio ourselves before we start? Who we are?
We can do that. I think our bios were on the website, but
It's personal.
Avi and I are both native New Yorkers. I grew up here, moved to Israel in 1994, lived there for 7 years, and for the last 17 years, I have been in Krakow for 10 years, the last 10 running the JCC, which has been open for 10 years.
And I grew up in New York, and then I was a rabbi in Vancouver, Canada for 5 years. I got my smicha in Yeshiva University. I'm a modern Orthodox rabbi. And actually, I live in Israel with my family, but I work in Krakow, Poland. So I travel back and forth every 2 weeks for the last 5 years.
So before I talk about the bicycle ride, which we'll talk about, and then Rabbi Avi is going to give us some context for the bicycle ride and connect it sort of textually to some Jewish stuff. I'll talk a little bit about JCC Krakow and what we're doing in Poland, because I think it's very counterintuitive and somewhat surprising for people that Poland, a place that we essentially see through the prism of the Holocaust, has become once again a center of Jewish life and a place with a thriving, growing Jewish community. Young people every day who didn't know they were Jewish are walking into our JCC. Poles who didn't know they were Jewish are walking into our center, having just found out that they're Jewish, and we are bringing them back into the Jewish world. And really the interesting aspect is, how did we get to that point? We think of Poland, as I said in the beginning, as a place of tragedy. And Poland was, of course, the center of the Holocaust. Poland had a thriving Jewish community before the war. For 1,000 years, Jewish life was thriving in Poland. At a certain point, 300 years ago, 75% of the Jews in the world lived in Poland. That's 3 out of every 4 Jews on the planet lived in Poland. And by 1939, on the eve of World War II, there were 3.5 million Jewish Poles. That was 10% of the population. Over 90% were murdered in the Holocaust. And then in our general Jewish narrative, we understand there were survivors. We understand the survivors left and came to all our communities, to New York, to France, to Buenos Aires, to Israel, to Miami. Survivors left Poland and went wherever they could go to rebuild their lives. And usually for us, that's the end of the story. We don't think much about Poland, Jewish Poland, beyond the Holocaust and beyond these survivors that left. But not all the survivors left. Some Jews, for different reasons, were a stubborn people. Jews stayed in Poland after World War II. And during communism, there were ups and downs. And during communism, again, the communist system was not very conducive to Jewish life. And at a certain point during communism, Jews made a choice, unfortunately, a choice that we've had to make many times in our history, which was to continue being Jewish in some sense somewhere else, or to stay in the place that they were living, in this case Poland, and stop being outwardly Jewish. And some Jews left Poland, this again during communism, and some Jews stayed. And the Jews who stayed went underground, they changed their names, and they often hid their own identities from their families. And that was really the end of Jewish life in Poland, not the Holocaust, as many of us think, but really during communism. And then in 1989, communism ends in Poland. The country is free for the first time. There starts to be a tremendous amount of non-Jewish interest in all things Jewish. Non-Jews want to understand what it means to be Polish in a free democratic country for the first 50 years. And one of the major differences is that there are no Jews, because the Jews in Poland have all been either murdered during the Holocaust, driven out, or driven underground during communism. So non-Jews start to become very interested. They start to write books. They start Jewish studies departments in museums. They start a Jewish culture festival in Krakow, started by two non-Jews right at the end of communism, one of whom is still running it, which, by the way, miracle of miracles, is the largest Jewish culture festival in the world. So I have to stop for a second as a New Yorker, as a native New Yorker, and say it's particularly surprising to me that the largest Jewish culture festival in the world is not either in Brooklyn or on the Upper West Side, but actually the largest Jewish culture festival in the world is in Krakow, Poland. So this backdrop of a tremendous interest in all things Jewish in Poland is the environment that we operate in, which is young people. The children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors are now finding out they're Jewish in miraculous ways. And maybe Rabbi Avi will tell us a story or two. He has many stories finding people that were Jewish, or people that just ran into him and having discovered their Jewish roots. And we bring these people back into the Jewish fold, back into the family. And our JCC, which has been open for 10 years, is dedicated to rebuilding Jewish life in Poland. So we just opened a preschool, which is the first Jewish kindergarten, first Jewish community kindergarten to open in over half a century in Krakow. We have Hillel, which we just opened, run through our JCC with 60 Jewish students. We're taking care of our Holocaust survivors, 60 Holocaust survivors that are members of the JCC. We have Shabbat dinners. We have Hebrew class. We have Arabic class. We have a genealogist to help people find their Jewish roots. We have a wonderful Orthodox rabbi. We have an also wonderful non-Orthodox rabbi that are doing their things at the JCC. So our JCC is really the center of Jewish life, and almost everything going on in a growing, vibrant Jewish community. Almost everything is happening in one building, which is sort of a remarkable thing. And one interesting aspect is all the tourists that visit us. We have many, many visitors. Historically, Jews came to Poland, historically, recent history, Jews came to Poland to visit Auschwitz, and now Jews are coming to Poland, of course, to still see the tragedy, still visit Auschwitz, but also to connect to the 1,000-year history. In Warsaw, you have a phenomenal museum that just opened, Polin, the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, which tells the entire 1,000-year history of the Jews in Poland. And the third reason that people are coming to Poland now is to see institutions like ours, or the JCC in Warsaw, which is also doing phenomenal work rebuilding Jewish life. And Poland is once again becoming a place of Jewish life. So last year we had 125,000 visitors that came through our small JCC, and this year that number is about 140,000. So this is a story that's begun to resonate in the Jewish world, this counterintuitive, surprising story of a place that we all think of as a place of tragedy, a place of destruction. The epicenter of the Holocaust is now becoming once again a place of Jewish life. And I think that has tremendous meaning for the Jewish world. At the end of the day, if Jewish life can thrive in Krakow, Poland, what does it say about us, the strength and resilience of the Jewish people, that we can actually thrive in a place where such terrible tragedy happened to our people in recent history, in living memory? So that's a little bit of backdrop about the JCC to give you some context, but I want to talk to you now about the Ride for the Living, which I have to say, I'm very proud of what we do at the JCC. I'm the director from the beginning. There's a lot to be proud of, I modestly say, but the Ride for the Living, this bicycle ride that we do, a one-day, 60-mile bicycle ride that we do from Auschwitz to Krakow to the JCC, is, I think, the best thing, or among the best things that we're doing there at all. So I'll tell you the story of the ride. We've been doing it for 5 years. We started in 2014. The ride has an interesting genesis. In 2014, a guy from London named Robert, Jewish guy, fell in love with a Polish woman, as one does, and he decided to move to Poland. And instead of doing what normal, sane people do, which is to get on a plane, Robert decided, he was a young, sporty guy, still is, Robert decided that he's going to ride his bicycle from London to Poland. And he was a bit of a history buff, and he wanted to raise awareness of the Holocaust. So he filmed his ride, he blogged about it, he had a GoPro on his head for a lot of the ride, and he went to sites related to the Holocaust. He stopped in all these different sites on his way, cycling from London to Poland. It took him 3 weeks. He cycled about 1,300, 1,400 miles actually, and he finished his trip in Auschwitz. So he cycled from London to Auschwitz. He came to Krakow, which is 60 miles from Auschwitz. He came to the JCC. He found something he wasn't expecting to find, which was a living, thriving Jewish community. He thought he was coming to Krakow and only going to find ghosts, and he found living Jews. We became good friends, and one day, Rabbi Avi and Robert and I and a friend of ours, Justin Cadis, who was a JDC Entwine fellow, and the JDC, the Joint, runs a wonderful program where they send young people all around the world to Jewish institutions, non-Jewish projects. So the four of us were sitting around one day and talking to Robert, and we said, listen, Robert, it's wonderful what you've done. You rode your bike all this way. You reduced the carbon footprint for the rest of us by not flying, but you finished in Auschwitz. And from my point of view, Auschwitz is not a place that you finish if you have a choice not to finish there. Too many Jews' lives were finished in Auschwitz and they had no choice to leave. And I think your ride, Robert, this 1,350-mile ride that you did from London to Auschwitz, I think it's unfinished, and we need to finish that ride. We need to finish your ride by going from Auschwitz, a place of darkness and tragedy, to the JCC in Krakow, a place of hope and a place of light. Robert said, okay. We did the ride the first year. Rabbi Avi was one of the 15 participants that we had in 2014, and we raised money. We did it as a fundraiser. We raised money, and we brought a group of 30 Holocaust survivors, 30 Polish, Jewish, JCC Krakow members, hidden children, child survivors of the Holocaust. We brought them to Israel on a mission. We went all around Israel. We went to Yad Vashem. They all paid tribute to the Poles who saved them, because they were all saved by non-Jewish Poles as children. It was a very emotional week. We were all there together. We said, listen, we're on to something. This ride helped fund this. We've got to do the ride again. So we do the ride again in 2015. Got to make it annual. We do the ride again in 2015. We had 85 participants. We're excited, good growth to go from 15 to 85 in 1 year. We're very happy with ourselves. And about a month before the ride, we get a call from a guy named Marcel. He says, hi, my name is Marcel. I live in Canada. I'm interested in the ride. We go, wow. So look at that. They've heard of us in Canada. Now we're doing really well. And Marcel then continues to tell us, he says, oh, I'm from Krakow. We say, okay, it's from Krakow. And I'm 80 years old. And Marcel begins to tell us that he's an 80-year-old Holocaust survivor from Krakow. He's an Auschwitz survivor. And when he was a 10-year-old boy in 1945, in January 27th, he, when he was liberated, walked with some of the other young children back to Krakow. He was in terrible shape. It took him a week to 10 days. He was looking for his family. His whole family had been murdered, he found out, except for his mom. And his mom found him a short time later after he got to Krakow. His mom found him. They lived in Poland for a while, where he became a cyclist. Then they moved to Israel. And from Israel, they moved to Montreal. And like all 80-year-old Jewish cyclists in Montreal, he spends his winters cycling in Boca. And then at the end of the call, Marcel says, oh, and can I come on Ride for the Living? We said, Marcel, can you come on the Ride for the Living? You had us at Canada. That was the Dayenu moment. But anyway, Marcel Zielinski in 2015, and then at the age of 80, came on Ride for the Living with us, an Auschwitz survivor. He brought his son and his two granddaughters who were living in Israel. So he rode along with the family that he created instead of walking and looking for the family that was murdered. He rode with the reborn Jewish community of Krakow and 85 people from all over the U.S. actually, and Poland. And we rode along the same path that he walked when he was liberated as a 10-year-old. So incredibly, incredibly dramatic. Marcel has been back every year. The ride has grown and grown. We've done it for 5 years now. In 2018, we had 220 participants. including Marcel, again at age 83. We had Bernard Offen, an 89-year-old Holocaust survivor who was in 5 camps. He did the ride with us. And what was really adding another element to it, besides having these 2 Holocaust survivors help transmitting memory and history to us with this ride, that we had Greg LeMond, who joined us with his wife. Greg is, of course, the only American to win the Tour de France, 3-time Tour de France winner, who came and did the bicycle ride with us. We had people from 12 different countries. We do it as a fundraiser, and it raised about 20–25% of our budget at JCC, which, by the way, the whole budget, almost the entire budget for what we're doing, we raise overseas. And the cool thing about the bicycle ride, it starts on a Thursday. Thursday is the day before. We visit Auschwitz. We have an opening dinner Thursday night in a 17th century synagogue. Friday is the bicycle ride. It's a very easy ride, flat, one day. We stop for lunch. We do it in a very Jewish laid back, plenty of snacks, bathroom breaks. We have doctors on motorcycles, so it's easy. You can do the beginning, you can do just the end. We leave from Birkenau, we make our way back to the JCC. We have a little celebration at the end. And then Friday night dinner, we do for about 600, 700 people. And Saturday, all different tours, food tour, street art tour, walk around beautiful, beautiful historic Krakow.
And the option for synagogue.
And the option for,
obviously.
No option for synagogue. You must go to synagogue. You must, no option. Synagogue is mandatory.
Just saying, you know.
Synagogue,
of
course.
Plug there.
I don't feel we need to say that everybody goes to synagogue. Doesn't everybody?
So after synagogue, there's all the activities.
Perhaps Rabbi Avi, for Avi, it's an option for synagogue. For me personally, not as a rabbi, synagogue is mandatory. Thank you, Avi.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sure.
And the cool thing is the bicycle ride, which takes place from June 27th to June 30th, the bicycle ride is in the middle of the Jewish Culture Festival. So I mentioned in the beginning, the Jewish Culture Festival, the largest Jewish culture festival in the world, and the bicycle ride is right in the middle of that. So you can come on the bicycle ride and experience this unprecedented hundreds and hundreds of different events related to Jewish culture. And that weekend, the Saturday night, the day after the ride, is the final culminating concert of the festival, 20,000 person open air concert, and something really remarkable. And I think the bicycle ride, and then Sunday is the closing ceremony and a party, and then that's the end of our weekend. I think what's remarkable to me about the ride is that you can do many initiatives that can support an institution. You can run the New York Marathon, which was last week, and you can do it for Jewish causes or non-Jewish causes, and you can help all these amazing charities that are supported by people who do bicycle rides and marathons and races and all things like this. And I think that's a great thing that people do. I think the unique aspect of Ride for the Living is you're actually tracing the arc of a community, in this case, the Polish Jewish community, going from the darkness of Auschwitz to the light, to the hope of JCC Krakow. And you're doing it to support the community as you take the actual journey that this community took. And I think it's something very special. And we'd love all of you to join us. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Avi Baumol.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. You did a good job. I will give you a blessing in the synagogue later about that. I want to echo Jonathan's sentiments specifically about the bike ride. I've been on it for 5 years, and it's something that is so emotional, and it's just a beautiful thing that you're riding through this pastoral lands, but you're thinking, wow, from Auschwitz to Krakow, from everything that represents horror and the darkness, and you're coming back to light, and people get together and they do it all, and it's really a beautiful journey. And we talk a lot about journeys. We, the Jewish community, does a lot of journeying and a lot of traveling until we find our promised land, and sometimes it's a literal location, and sometimes land of Israel where my family lives, and sometimes it's a mindset. And we are constantly on this journey, and we feel that the symbol of this journey of going from Auschwitz to Krakow in one day really represents the JCC and the revival of Jewish life, which is a part of this arc and in this trajectory that we are very hopeful that it continues, and we see that it really continues to create Jewish life and Jewish community in Krakow and in Poland. And it's a beautiful thing for me, coming from New York and I got a call from the chief rabbi around 5.5 years ago saying, Chief Rabbi of Poland, can you come to Krakow to help out with Jewish life and be the rabbi there? And my initial response was, but there are no Jews in Krakow. There are no Jews in Poland. I mean, I grew up in New York. You hear about the Holocaust and you learn about the story, but you just don't assume that there's still any Jewish life left. And he said, well, speak to Jonathan Ornstein. And I remember we had a Skype call, and I told you my problem. Like, seems like a good idea, but am I going to be a custodian in the cemetery? And you laughed and you said, you don't understand what's happening here, and you have to come see for yourself. And I really believe that as much as we can do in a call or in a class or in our speaking engagements, when you come and you see what's happening, and especially on a Friday night where you have, in one room, you have survivors who, they went through the darkest era of their lives, and now they're enjoying returning to Jewish life. And in the same room, you have young people who found out that they're Jewish, and everyone's singing together, and everyone's celebrating Shabbat in this way. It's really it's a beautiful idea. And so I thought about this, the topic here of this Global Day of Jewish Learning, and we talked about texts and traditions, and I just wanted to share. I wrote a little something up in a text in a Sefaria source sheet, which I sent. I think it will be posted on our board. And we read the Parsha, we read the Jewish Bible every week, and we go from, and there are 54 titles, and each one represents a different facet of our history and our story. And one of them is just called travel. The whole Parsha is called travel. It's called Mas'eh. And it's so interesting that the Torah, which doesn't leave us a lot of information about a lot of things, decides to tell us all the specific stations that we took in the desert and going from one place into another, and what happened, and the highlights. And it's very interesting what is highlighted and what is kind of just like not really focused on, which, it doesn't even mention the Exodus from Egypt. It really talks about specific things that took place during this journey for 40 years in the desert. And some of them have to do with water, where there was nothing to drink, and people were starving, and God kind of did a miracle there and saved us. And then in other places, it's when we complained and the struggles that we had, and the vicissitudes of traveling in the desert, and what that represented. And the Parsha really it doesn't send us a specific message of, this is what we want to share. It just says, hey, we Jews sometimes need to travel, and we need to get from one place to another. And it's not only what happens at the end and where you arrive, but it's the travel experience. It's the process. And the Torah is telling us that in this process, sometimes we will have pitfalls. Sometimes we will struggle. And sometimes we'll be forced to stay in one place, and the tragedy will take place. And the question is not about this action, although we remember it, but it's about our reaction. How do we rebuild? How do we see what took place here and say, we're not going to let it define us, and we're not going to let it stifle us or paralyze us? What we're going to do is learn from it, build upon it, and continue to strive forward. And I think this idea of going forward is I think it's a message that finds its expression throughout the Bible, throughout the Torah. Moses travels with the children of Israel and takes them up to the promised land, and then God says, for whatever reason that we don't really understand, God says, you're not going. And you'd think that this would be a time for Moses to break down, and this would be a time for Moses to start complaining. And yet, what he does to God immediately, he says to God, okay, let's appoint my successor, because he's got to take the people in. And it's got to be Joshua, because he knows how to lead and he knows how to go to the next generation. And this is Moses saying, I've done my share, and I'm not going to let it get me down that I can't reach this promised land, but I want to move forward, and I want to make sure that we continue taking this to the next level. And I think that idea finds its expression throughout the Bible, and finds its expression throughout Jewish consciousness till this very day. And I think that there's one amazing verse that's found in Mishlei and Proverbs, 24. It says, Kisheva yipol tzadik vakam. 7 times a righteous person will fall, but he will get up. Urishayim yikashlu bara. But the evil ones, 1 failure, and that will be too much for them. And this idea of, we fall 7 times, but each time we get up and
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a nice one. And each time we and there's another verse even in Micha that says, Ki nafalti kamti, ki eshev b'choshech Hashem orli. When I fell, I rise immediately. And there's the notion of falling, the notion of seemingly failing is just a way for us to rise again. And that's the experience that I've had in Krakow over the last 5 years that I've been there, from a religious perspective. When you have a 900-year Jewish community and you have the 16th century, which is really the intellectual climax of Jewish scholarship in 1,000 years in Krakow, and then it all comes crashing down. And it's very natural. And then communism stifles it. And it's very natural, and it makes sense to say, well, we have the state of Israel, and we have America, and we have all these other communities. Therefore, Jewish Poland is dead. Let's move on and just say goodbye. And the truth is, if there were no Jews left in Poland, I would understand that. And we would have to say, sadly, this is our lot. But there are still Jews. There's still Jewish life. It somehow managed to survive throughout it all. And you don't see it just in historical context. You see it in a religious context, because it's the Jewish people following the message of the Bible, saying we continue our travels, we continue going forward. We fell 7 times, even tenfold during the Holocaust, but we rise again. And I've experienced this rise again in walking through the halls of the JCC and walking through the streets of Krakow. Whenever I walk around, and I always wear my kippah, and I never had any anti-Semitic incident, not one, and neither has the JCC. There are Hebrew words all over the gates, and the gates are wide open, and you can come in and you can feel invited and welcome. And I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism in Poland. Unfortunately, we as Jews know that there's anti-Semitism everywhere, but I haven't experienced anything overt. The opposite is true. I have people coming up to me and they're saying shalom, and they say, I know someone who's Jewish, or there's some kind of connection. I even have a story where we met him, and she said, oh, are you Jewish? And I said, yes, I am. In fact, I'm even a rabbi. And there was like a bonus, for her. And she started telling me that she's studying Hebrew in the JCC, which is really remarkable that we in the JCC have a Hebrew ulpan. I think there are 5 levels.
No, it's almost, I think about 10 levels.
And there are, 200 people
that
are studying Hebrew, and they're not Jewish.
Most of
them. And it's so beautiful that they want to learn Hebrew. They want to understand that. They want to visit Israel. And I said, wow, Paula, it sounds like you've got Jewish connections. She said, no, I'm not Jewish. She said, my grandmother, she was Jewish. I said, Paula, I've got a little secret for you. She just didn't know. She didn't know that that's how it works with us. And when I told her that when your grandmother is Jewish, you are 100% Jewish and you're welcome to come, she said something so beautiful, which not everyone would say in Europe. When you find out you're Jewish, you're not rushing to say immediately, wow, what can I do? How can I learn more? Where can I find more expression about Judaism? She did that. And a lot of other people that I've bumped into have said that to me, and I invite them to the JCC, and they meet with Jonathan, and they meet with young Jews, and they learn that here is a place that you can come back to your Jewish identity on any level that you want. You can take Jewish yoga, you can take yoga classes, you can celebrate festivals with us, or you can come and study with me. You can do any of the sort. And Paula became for me like this symbol of, wow, you know what I'm doing here in Krakow? I'm trying to fight against Hitler, because Hitler he annihilates 90% of the Jewish community of Poland. And then for the next 50 years, the 10% also seem to disappear. And when I find Paula and I say, no, you're Jewish, and I find hundreds more like her, And there are all other rabbis in Poland finding people and saying, no, if your grandparents are Jewish, you are Jewish too, you can come back. Look what we've done. You know, we've restored, we've brought back to life. We've followed the spirit of the Torah of Kisheva Yipol Bakam. 7 times we fall, but we keep getting up. And as long as there's someone to say you have a connection to your Jewish past and you are interested in it, we can continue to build forward, and we can continue to restore, and we can fight against the evil that was perpetrated in the past, and we can kind of set the way to towards a brighter future. And that's part of what I'm doing there. I'm kind of looking for Jews, really, you know, welcoming them in and helping them become more involved. But I also have a secondary part of my job, which is I teach non-Jews. I speak a lot, and I try to you know, repair a kind of a wound, you know, between the non-Jewish Poles that, you know, they went through their experience, and they're interested in finding out about what Judaism is about, and they want to learn from a rabbi, and they want to understand the past. And you know what's amazing, Jonathan, there's so many things to tell about the JCC, and one of the things that I marvel at all the time is that there are 50 non-Jewish volunteers. I mean, who has such a thing? There's an institution that is Jewish run and has Jewish membership, but 50 non-Jews who say, I'm here because I want to help out and I want there to be Jewish life in Krakow. And I find that to be so inspiring, and I kind of feed off of that, and I want people to understand that, yes, it's Jewish membership and we are building Jewish life, but there are classes for non-Jews as well, and I teach those classes. And if I can give a class to 30 or 40 non-Jews and teach them about Judaism, and then one of them comes over to me and says, by the way, you know, my grandfather was Jewish, and I said, oh, you know, come on back. You can also join as a member of the Jewish people. That's a beautiful dimension. So for me, it's not easy because, as I said, my wife and children live in Israel, and I travel back and forth. But I do it because perhaps tomorrow I'm going to meet someone else on the street. I'm going to tell them, you know, if you have Jewish roots, you're welcome to come back to Jewish life. And their grandparents were Jewish, and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. And I can restore, or we can help restore that Jewish link and continue to create the future of Jewish life. I think it's a beautiful endeavor, and I'm going to continue doing it as long as Jonathan allows me to come to hang out with him and work on this important idea together.
Thank you for that, Rabbi. I think so far, we'll take it day by day.
Okay,
but I think we're doing all right. There may be two things I wanted to touch on, which is sort of maybe larger issues about the role of the Holocaust and I think Poland's special mission today. You know, it's interesting as Jews that we have had so much tragedy in our history, yet we still want to be Jewish and think that, you know, I'd like to tell people that if you took a piece of paper and you listed all the tragedies and all that's happened to us as Jews, whether it's the, you know, destruction of the temple and expulsion and Spain and Inquisition and pogroms and Holocaust and anti-Semitism that exists even today, we don't need to look very far. The United States, the tragedy that happened recently in the synagogue in Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. I mean, it's not easy. It hasn't been easy being a Jew. And yet, we don't hide from our Jewish identity. We embrace our Jewish identity. And there's something in our values, in our tradition, in the Torah, from Hashem, wherever we're getting that, there's something that makes us want to continue being Jewish. And I think that there's a very special aspect of being Jewish, which is being able to balance this tragic history, often tragic history, with this perpetual optimism. It's funny when Jewish comedians and we say, oh, Jews are so negative and Jews complain. I don't think so at all. I think Jews are the most optimistic people in the world. And I think that this complaining and kvetching about things is really a way for us to maintain our optimism, because the history has been so difficult. We have to kind of we have to allude to it, but not really focus on it. And I think that that is really embodied by, for example, at a Jewish wedding. We take a moment, it's a day of happiness. And I recently got married, which is, some weddings are on my mind. I recently got married to a young woman from Krakow who grew up without knowing she was Jewish and found out she was Jewish and then in her 20s. And we met at the JCC. So it's a very nice story, sort of in keeping with, you
have to keep with the message.
Got to stay. I got to stay as a director. I got to stay on message. But this idea of something in our values that allows us to maintain this optimism. And at a wedding, this happy day, we break a glass for a second, and people focus on, oh, we break a glass. It's a sad aspect of the wedding to commemorate the tragedy of the destruction of the temples and other tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people. But it's all about the balance. In other words, the wedding is a happy day and you take a moment of sadness. And we Jews are always about the balance. And I think what's a challenge today in terms of the Holocaust is that as we are entering a time when there will be no Holocaust survivors among us within 10, 15 years, which is sad, that we have to learn the lesson of the Holocaust, the obvious lesson, to make sure it never happens to us and make sure it never happens to anyone else ever again, and to make the world more tolerant. And we as Jews, because of what we've suffered, I think have a special calling to help the world be a more tolerant place. But there's another aspect of the Holocaust that we need to be mindful as Jews, which is to not define ourselves by the tragedy. We are defined, I think, as Jews, much more by how we respond to tragedy, how we get up. And Rabbi Abi talked about getting, 7 times getting up. And this is the Jewish people, 7,000 times we've gotten up. And with the Holocaust, when we come to Poland, and the challenge for people when people come visit or when we learn about the Holocaust in school, is to not say, oh my God, look what happened to our people in Europe in between 1939 and 1945. That's who we are. No, who we are is the people that, despite the tragedy of the Holocaust, is still thriving all over the world and still thriving in many places, even in Europe and even in Poland and even in Krakow down the road from Auschwitz. And I think that that's something that's very, very special. And as much as we have a responsibility, a solemn responsibility to never forget, I think we have a responsibility as Jews to not define ourselves by the Holocaust. And I've come to understand in 17 years living in the shadow of Auschwitz that we Jews are Jewish despite Auschwitz, not because of Auschwitz.
A lot of people ask me all the time when I give these lectures, so what do you think is about the future of Jewish Poland? Like, what's your attitude? And I don't just say the word, well, I'm confident 100%. I think as Jews, we're like, I say I'm cautiously optimistic, because unfortunately, as Jews, we, there's always one suitcase packed somewhere in our home. But nevertheless, the experience that I've had has shown it to be very, very positive about what's happening in a Europe that's not so friendly to Jews in certain countries, whereas in Poland, some would say ironically, but we think that it's just marvelous that in Poland, which usually is described as the place where it's the worst place for the Jews, actually a positive place and an optimistic place, and Jews are smiling and Jews are having a good time. So it's an interesting experience, and people struggle with that when they come, Jews especially. Like, how can you be happy? And say, these are things that are happening. We're excited about that. And absolutely, the idea of defining ourselves by the Holocaust, we never ignore. I mean, Auschwitz is an hour away. We've both been there quite often. We go for the memorials, but in the JCC, we speak about life. We speak about joy, and the old survivors. They don't want to sit there and talk about the loss and the death and the destruction. It's part of their lives. It's part of being in Krakow, Poland. But they instead speak about the future and their grandchildren and joy and how they can best live out the Jewish identity in Krakow. It's beautiful.
Speaking of Auschwitz and how many times you and I have countless times visited Auschwitz, it's never easy. It's always a difficult place to visit. And in 17 years, I can't. It's been so many difficult visits to Auschwitz. And you think it gets easier, but it doesn't, because every time something else hits you. It's a very, very difficult place, as is to visit any of the camps in Poland. And unfortunately, most of the camps were in Poland. And I think for me, one of the frustrations visiting Auschwitz, or even living near Auschwitz, and then you think about it often, one of the frustrations is that we can't really do anything tangible about it. We can study and we can learn, and as we said before, we can make sure it never happens to us or to anybody else again. But we can't save the Jews. We can't, or the other people that were murdered in Auschwitz and the other camps. Now, it wasn't only Jews, although the Jews were the focus. We can't build a time machine. We can't go back and tell Jews to get out of Europe. We can't pull them out and rescue and do that. And we're visiting, and we can mourn, and we can commemorate, and we can try to build a better world, so that there's no place in a world, there's no place for future Auschwitzes. But it's frustrating. We can't save those Jews. But what I've come to understand, and what we're doing in Krakow, and what really I think means the most to me, is that, and motivates me to work and to do what I'm doing, is that we have an opportunity that we never thought we would have. We can actually move the needle. We thought Polish Jewry was over, and we are actually, these young people that we're reaching out to, including my wife, including people that you meet in the mall and that walk into our building every day. These young people are secondary victims of the Holocaust. They weren't in the camps, and they weren't murdered or have to survive hiding, but they were cut off from their own identity because of really the Holocaust, and then the second horror of what happened during communism. And we have an opportunity now to do something as the Jewish world, those of us on the ground in Krakow, and really those of us all around the Jewish world, which is to reach out and to move the needle, and to do something and actually move the needle about how many Jews were lost to the world because of the Holocaust. Not how many Jews were murdered, that's already in the past, but how many Jews were lost because of the Holocaust. And I think as Jews, because we have the opportunity to do this, we have the responsibility. I think there's very little daylight at all between opportunity and responsibility. And we've been given this gift of time that we can reach out and bring these Jews back into the fold. And I think we need to do everything we can while they're still finding out, while their grandparents are still telling these stories. The window of opportunity is open now, and we need to do all we can as the Jewish world to help, because we owe it to the victims, and we owe it even more to the survivors and their children and grandchildren who are still out there and who need to be brought back into the family.
100%, 100%. There was a there was a case where a young woman was telling me that she just found out just a few years before from her grandmother, who was literally on her deathbed, and she told her, listen, I didn't tell you all these years that that you were Jewish because I was afraid of what's out there. But you know what? It's 2015, and I want to share this with you. You're Jewish. And she said, what are you talking about? And she said, I have to tell you, and I want to teach you how to bake challah. And she said, well, what are you talking about, bake challah? What are you talking about, Jewish? And she said, listen, come back on Saturday, and we'll bake challah together, and I'll tell you everything. And unfortunately, she passed away the next day. And this young woman, it was a deathbed confession. And luckily, I said to her, well, you come to the right person, because we in the JCC, we have young people who are having a challah baking class. And there are other young people who found out that they're Jewish. And we can restore a little bit about what your grandmother just revealed to you in her final moments. Our job, as Jonathan said, is we have a small window of opportunity. The grandparents, the previous generation is kind of disappearing. And if we have a chance to find these people and to tell them, listen, we're not forcing it down your throat. We're telling you that if you want to learn about your Jewish identity, we have a place. We have the address. And I remember my first day of coming to Krakow, I met a young woman named Olga, and she said, listen, Rabbi, I found out I was Jewish. I confronted my mother, and I said, this doesn't make sense. Why is Jewish life so important to you if we're not Jewish? And the mother finally confessed and said, okay, your grandmother was Jewish. She said to me, but I don't really know what it means to live your life as a Jew. Can you teach me? Like, wow, music to rabbinic ears, can you imagine someone coming and saying, please teach me? And she became one of my best students. And today she is working in the JCC, and she's living her life as a Jew. And how many more Olgas are out there? How many more Agnieszkas can we find? And it's about moving that needle. It's about finding more people and bringing them and giving them an opportunity. And if we can do that, as I said, yeah, we're doing something about the Holocaust. It's amazing.
So I think that we can take some questions if people watching all around the world, probably in other places as well. It's a little later, other places in the world besides the U.S. If people have any questions, Rabbi Avi and I are happy to try to answer those questions.
I'm not sure we'll have the same answers.
Today we're doing a very good job of agreeing with
okay.
stuff.
Well,
right?
I'm being nice. I'm letting some things pass, but we need to keep our check. I'm the rabbinic conscience, and Jonathan's
the moral conscience.
I wouldn't say the moral conscience. I think it's packed into the rabbinic conscience. You're more of the.
So here's the first question: who is the oldest hidden child we've met? Who is the youngest? So the oldest, I can tell you an interesting story. Not necessarily that they were a hidden child, but it was in terms of person that we've met that didn't know they were that had no connection with Jewish life, which is a guy who was almost 80, walked into Jewish guy. He always knew he was Jewish. He was listening to the radio. He had no connection with Jewish life since the Holocaust. He was saved and then just was living his life, had no connection. He said he was very young when he was saved during the war, and he was listening to the radio, and he heard it was a radio show about us in Krakow, and I think it was me or someone else from the staff talking and saying, "Oh yes, we're a center, but it's not only a religious center; it's for everybody. If you're religious, not Orthodox, religious, not so religious, it's for everybody, and we do all these different activities." And it inspired him to come in, and he never had any connection. Why did he never have any connection? His very vague memories of his childhood before the war of his family was that they weren't religious. And after the war, you could go to a synagogue, and he said, "Oh, so I thought we weren't religious. I'm not supposed to go to a synagogue." And then he just forgot, really, that was the end of his Jewish identity until he's listening to the radio 70 years later and decided that, oh, wait a minute, it's not only a synagogue, there's a non-religious component to being Judaism. Sure, that sounds good to me. And he walked in, and since then he's become active, and his family has become active. So you never know really what's going to touch people.
And the youngest is Pana Christina, right? She's in her 70s now, but she was passed under the ghetto walls. And she found out much later in life, because they kept the secret from her, and she found out that she was Jewish, and she started coming to the Jewish community, and she didn't tell her granddaughter. Right?
Maybe the youngest that we've met in our context now.
Right.
So the youngest now, it's a good question. Teenagers, people, there's an interesting story. I don't want to say the names necessarily, that there was a woman,
hidden child. So.
But a grandmother, but the youngest, who found out that they were Jewish. So there's a good, one of the interesting stories, a woman who's a child survivor of the Holocaust. So she's now in her early 80s, and she never told her family that she was Jewish. And one day she was on the phone, and her granddaughter, who was in the house, heard her speaking and saying something like, "Oh, I'm something Jewish. I'm going to that meeting of the organization, Jewish organization." And her granddaughter was a teenager, maybe 13, 14, and was like, "Grandma, what are you talking about?" And she's like, "Okay, well, yeah, you got me. We're Jewish." And since then, this granddaughter, who's now in her early 20s, has become very involved. She comes all the time. She's been to Israel many times. So you never know. It's just all these random ways that people find out. What we're sure about, though, is that there are tens and tens of thousands of Jews today, Poles with Jewish roots. And if we do a good job reaching out, and our building and our institution and other institutions and the chief rabbi of Poland and the different religious congregations and the JCC in Warsaw and what we're doing, if all of us together are able to provide good programming and a welcoming entry point, non-threatening into Jewish life, then we'll be able to regain many of those people.
And I would also say that as a result of this, of the kindergarten, so they're the newest Jewish members.
It's a good answer. That's absolutely. So we opened a year ago. We opened a preschool early childhood center called Frida, and I think the name is important because Frida in Polish means joy. But Frida entered the Polish from the Yiddish like Freilich. This is from the same word. So it really shows the interconnectedness by calling it this name Frida, which comes from the Yiddish into the Polish, shows how connected the Jewish and Polish people have been over the centuries. We started with 8 children, 8 Jewish kids a year ago, and this year we have 16. So we've doubled in size in 1 year, which is something we're incredibly proud of at the JCC.
And going there and sitting with the kids, and they jump all over us, and blowing the shofar with them, and we realize, wow, we speak about Jewish future of Poland, and we're looking at it right in front of our eyes. So it's really, really amazing.
What is something we can do in our own communities to open up to people who are just coming into the Jewish heritage? That's a very good question. I think that to be open, to understand that Judaism, to use the term, is a very, very big tent. And there are all different ways to be Jewish. And, Rabbi Avi is a modern Orthodox rabbi, and he has his way of being Jewish, which is not a monolithic way, but he has his general way of life, and that's one way. And then there are other ways, and
it's a pretty good way.
It's an excellent way, and he does a good job, of it. And I also grew up that way. I'm, slightly less that way these days. But I think that it's important, that you make people feel welcome straight away. The first impression is so important. If somebody walks into your community center or into your synagogue with a story like that, oh yes, wow, wonderful. Oh, you just found out from your grandparent that you're Jewish. Welcome, come. Can I invite you for Shabbat dinner? I think that this idea of being open and welcoming the stranger is something very strong in Judaism, of course, coming from Abraham, and we take that very seriously. And I think be welcoming, make the barrier very low. Oh, you just found out you're Jewish? Go study, these 25 texts. No, you've just found out you're Jewish. Great, welcome to the family. Be part of this. Find something that you like.
Yeah, I would say introduce them to the joy of being Jewish,
yes,
to the family of being Jewish, and to the depth of Jewish knowledge and history and religion. All that together. And I don't think you should just say, oh, you want to be Jewish? Well, we have yoga, and that's what Judaism was about. No, it's about so much more. So let them experience all of the different aspects.
Nothing against yoga. Yoga, of course, is very
I'd love to
important
do
for Jews.
yoga.
You should do some yoga.
I really.
Rabbi would do some yoga. He's not so flexible.
I need to do yoga. So no offense.
Because it helps us with
community.
No, of course not. And yoga is also good. Keeps you nice and centered and limber and flexible, which is good for the bicycle riding.
Limber and
got to bring it all back to the bicycle riding.
Yes, obviously.
How do you talk to people about their hidden Jewish roots, especially if it's a shock? Another good question. So what I've come to understand with a little practice about this, and I don't think that there's not really a book for this. We can't go and study and do a course, rebuilding Jewish life in a post-Holocaust, post-communist environment, how to talk to people. We're really making this up as we go along.
But we should write a book.
But we should write a book. If there are any publishers out there waiting for offers. I think what I've come to understand, and I remember I had a very dramatic situation where a young woman came in and told me this story, another similar type deathbed confession. And she looked at me so nervous and expectantly. And I said, you've come to the right place. There are many others like you here. So I think we have the advantage of having the majority of our community. Most of the young people in Krakow grew up without knowing they're Jewish. So it's enough to tell these people, no matter what this crazy story is that I'm hearing, and internally I'm thinking, I can't believe this story, but externally I'm, oh, wow, that's great, wonderful. There are, I know a lot of other young people with a similar story. Come and meet them, come for Shabbat dinner, and just do that. I think that we try to not make it as if it's not a big deal, and not make them feel like they're strange. I think that and we have an advantage because that's the story of most people. I understand that if you walked into a synagogue in New York City with a story like that, it would be a little bit, maybe not more difficult, but less common for people to hear that. So because we're getting that all the time, I think it makes it a little bit easier. And that's what we do. But people,
I agree 100%. I agree. It's about creating an environment where, welcome, check it out and see what it's about. Because even though in our minds we're thinking, oh my God, we just did something, we can't say that. We have to say, there's a class here, or there's a Friday night dinner there, and baby steps, because it's a frightening thing.
Yes. So here's a good question for you, Rabbi Avi. What are some text resources in Torah and Talmud that we can learn from that teach us how to understand the tragedy of genocide or oppression? I'm gonna let you. I'm gonna let you take that one.
Woo! Oh my, that's a heavy one. It's a heavy one, and something I think about a lot because I'm in Krakow and Auschwitz, and there are so many texts struggling with this question of theodicy, why bad things are happening or happened to good people. The Talmud says that Moses was asking this question on the mountain when he was talking with God, and there's a famous story that Moses is like shown the beauty and the scholarship of Rabbi Akiva. And he's like, wow, this man is so amazing. And then he sees how he's tortured and he's murdered. And Moses turns to God and he screams to him and he says, this is Torah and this is its reward. And God said, you don't get to know all of my secrets. And it's a really, really difficult midrash, because it's basically acknowledging that as far as we are and advanced and confident about how the world works and how society works, there are certain unknowns to us. And it's easy to, I guess, blame God, but a more humble and deep way is to try to accept that we don't really understand everything, but that doesn't paralyze us from moving forward and continuing to build. And certainly in light of the tragedies that have been going on, unfortunately, our job is to try to prevent future tragedy and future aggression to anyone. And genocide, transcends all religions and cultures. But having, God and having it centered and having Torah, it is something that you can find inspiration from, if not all the answers, but at least some inspiration from, saying, oh, wow, Moses had the same experience. Job had the same experience. Isaiah had the same experience, and what they learned from it and how that developed. But this is a big topic, and there's really a lot to think about. And the Yidach Zilug more. Keep looking at it and studying it, and hopefully you gain more from it.
How do I join Ride for the Living? Oh, excellent question. So Ride for the Living this year will be June 27th to June 30th. There's a website, ridefortheliving.org, where you can sign up. You don't need to bring anything. You just need to bring a pair of shorts. We give you a jersey and a bicycle and insurance and the and the doctor's there and everything. We'll take care. You can register through us, hotel, everything. You just need to get yourself to Krakow on June 27th, 2019 to sign up for the bicycle ride. If any of you also are interested in getting involved, learning how to support this community, to be involved in the rebirth of Jewish life, you can go to friendsofjcckrakow.org. That's JCCKRAKOW.org. And there's more information there about getting involved, and get in touch with me, with Rabbi Avi. And we encourage you to come visit on the bicycle ride, come on March of the Living, come visit anytime. Many synagogues and federations and individuals are coming. We have people at our JCC who are dedicated. We have a visitor services department. We're dealing with all of these Jewish visitors and non-Jewish visitors who come visit us. And we can help you with every single thing. From my point of view, the last thing I wanted to say was that many people have told us that the experience is with the preconceptions about tragedy, that people these days, you come to Poland saying Kaddish and you leave Poland saying Shehechianu.
Well, I don't know if I could beat that in concluding. You did a rabbi on me.
See, not only the
now I have
rabbi.
to come up with some kind of other ways to say it. But what I would say is along with similar lines. But for me, I came to Poland to teach, and I learned, and I came to kind of spread a message, and I was inspired, and that's something that you don't usually think that is going to happen. And me as a rabbi, I have learned so much, and I've changed so much as a result of my experience. And if you come to visit us, I think you'll have the same experience.
Thank you. So we have been very honored and proud, and this is a lot of fun. We thank Global Day of Jewish Learning for having us. We hope you will continue your Jewish learning. For us in Krakow, every day is a Global Day of Jewish Learning.
Absolutely.
With amazing educators like Rabbi Avi Baumol. Come see this miracle experience. There aren't many miracles going on today in the world, in the Jewish world, and Poland is one of them. It's an easy flight. Krakow is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's an incredibly best preserved Jewish quarter anywhere. Incredible old town. It's an easy flight from the US. It's close to Israel. Come visit us and see what all the magic is about, and come on the Ride for the Living and be part of this amazing rebirth and miraculous revival.
And you can come hang out with us.
Come hang out with us. We're a lot of fun.
That'll be great.
We're a lot of
we
fun.
look forward to hearing from you and hopefully seeing you.
Be well. Shavua Tov.
Bye-bye.
Bye.